Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. We are the only show where all of the guests are on the other side of the life veil. And we're brought to you on Para-X Radio Network.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. I would like to thank you all for tuning in to our show this evening. As usual, I will be asking the questions of our spirit guests, King David and King Solomon. These two spirits built the kingdom of Israel around 800 years before the birth of Jesus, and their lives influenced three of the great religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It'll be interesting to see if their lives differed from what is written in the Gospels. We will be taking questions from the chat room, and as always, we really appreciate if you tell your friends so that we can continue to grow our audience.
Okay, we always try to do a short disclaimer. So the opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Para-X Network, or of our sponsors. Now, all of our shows I make available on our YouTube channel. It's in my name, Barry Strohm. At the current time, we have over 370 videos of paranormal channeling activity up on the YouTube. If you'd like to download them, you need to go to Podomatic.com and just search Channeling History. We can also be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Pandora, iTunes, and many of the other platforms.
Okay. As usual, we welcome your questions tonight through the chat room. I always try to get to as many of them as I can. While we do have questions prepared, we always really look forward to your participation. I need to take some diction classes.
Okay. Connie, let's do the prayer and get on with it before we start choking on our words even more.
Okay. And I promise everybody I was not drinking with dinner tonight. God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God.
All right, Connie, let's start with King David. I know he's here.
Welcome, King David. We really appreciate your coming with us this evening. Would you like to begin with a message?
Yes, I would. It has been thousands of years since I was really a true messenger of God. He asked me to try to bring order from chaos. It was a very, very difficult time. Moses had led the people to what you now refer to as Judea, or the area of Israel. The tribes were not worshiping the one God. They were worshiping idols. He wanted me to try to establish a foundation. He wanted me to do what I could to bring the tribes together, to unite them, and to try to make them a powerful country. I did the best I could. I made some mistakes, as we all do, but I tried my best. And I think the fact that I'm still remembered 3,000 years later means that I did succeed in certain ways. So I thank you for allowing me to speak, and I appreciate the time. And I also thank you for bringing my son along as well.
Oh, we like family get-togethers. Did you look?
Did.
Okay. Okay. Have you reincarnated since your life as David?
I have actually come back several lifetimes. I've been back 3 or 4. Actually, I think it was 4 times. One of those times was on another planet, so I guess that doesn't count.
Sure, it does.
But I did truly come back. I have served God several other times, but I was never as effective as I was in my life as David. I came back during the Dark Ages. I was a member of the church. I tried to bring God's words to the people of the time. But it was a very difficult trip, and I did not accomplish nearly what I wanted to do. But yes, it's been a long time, and I have lived multiple lifetimes since my time as David.
Will you tell us about Judea at the time of your birth?
Well, as I said in my opening message, it was a time of chaos. There were many tribes. All of the tribes had their own leaders. Many of the tribes had begun to worship idols. Idol worship was very common. Keep in mind that Jesus had not walked the earth. It would be another 900 years until he was present. Moses had led the different tribes to Judea. He had tried to convince them of the truth of the one God. But it had been 3 or 4 generations since he had brought everyone to the promised land. Many of the tribes had influences out of the area. Those influences had guided them towards idol worship. They were very disorganized. It was a time where there was no common law. There was no way of a common defense against enemies. A large enemy could have destroyed the different tribes because they weren't standing together. It was a very difficult time.
Okay, I know this might be difficult, but in approximately what year were you born?
Well, keep in mind that we didn't have good formal calendars in these days. So now that I'm on the other side, I would say that I was born around 910 BC, but that is very approximate.
I understand that. Could you tell us about your early life?
I was not educated. I was a shepherd. I tried my best to be strong. I tried to learn how to protect myself. It was a time where there were no police, or there was no way of having an interaction of peacemakers. We were always at war. There were individuals that wanted to wipe our tribes out. I was very gifted. I was very intelligent. I tried to help others. I would get messages. I would see angels. I would have dreams where I was told that I had been chosen to do many things. I guess you would say that I simply lived a normal life for those times, although situations came about that were anything but normal.
Okay, I believe you said that Moses was born before you. So about how many generations was he before you?
He was about 4 generations before me, possibly 5. Moses had brought the people very close, had led the people to the lands upon which we were living approximately in your time about 100 years before I was born.
Okay. Would you tell us about the Philistines and Goliath, the big guy?
The Philistines were our enemies. They tried to conquer us. They had been very successful in military actions against us. Saul, who was the first king, had put together an army in order to fight the Philistines. The Philistines had a very unique individual. He was very tall, very strong, and he was their main fighter. He would tower above the average person. Goliath wanted to fight our king or his representative. I volunteered to fight him. Now, I was not an overly tall person, so at first everyone laughed. But Saul wanted no part of fighting with Goliath. He realized that it would result in his death. Saul knew that I had been introduced to him before the battle, and he knew that I was quite adept at using a sling with rocks in it. Now, that might seem very primitive, and it was, but when you were a shepherd, you had to have some way to chase off the wild animals that were trying to eat your flocks. And a sling and a rock was very effective. So I was quite adept at it. So I came forth. Goliath laughed when he saw me. He thought that the Israelites had lost their minds to send somebody like me forward. He actually stood, I would say, close to 8 of your feet. He was a huge individual. Now, keep in mind, in those days, most of us were relatively short. So for someone of that size, to look at him was overwhelming. As I approached him and got close, he drew his sword back, and I used my sling, and I know that the rock was guided by God, but it actually hit him in the middle of the forehead, and it hit him with such force that he became unconscious and fell. I immediately ran to him and grabbed his sword, and in those days, it was very common that you would cut the head off of your opponent, and that is what I did. When the Philistines saw what I did, they were amazed, and they ran in fear. So from that day forward, King Saul thought that I was a very, very special person, which I had managed to do something that none of the other Israelites would have attempted.
Okay, Saul was the first king of the Israelites. Could you expand on your relationship with Saul?
Once that I killed Goliath, he welcomed me. He welcomed me into his court, and I was very close to him. I was quite talented at music, and I had learned to play a type of harp that was prevalent in those days. The people applauded my success as well. The members of the different tribes thought that I had done something really special, which I had, and they started to proclaim my popularity. Saul, I think, as you would describe him today, had had some mental problems. In modern terminology, I think that he had a split personality or possibly was bipolar. So there were times that he would applaud me. There were times that he would show his love for me. There were times that he would introduce me to the people. But as I became more popular, there were times that he would resent me very strongly. I think as my popularity grew, he decided that I would try to take over the throne. It was never my desire to do that. I always respected Saul, but I was told that he had made plans to have me killed or assassinated. So I actually fled from his court and lived among the people for several years.
Okay, so that's how you avoided capture then. Why didn't you want Saul dead after what he was doing to you?
I had great respect for him. Keep in mind that I was but a shepherd, that I really had no intention of becoming the king of the Israelites. I wanted simply for him to show respect and love for me. He was a special person. I was not an individual that God wanted me to show violence towards others for no reason. I just deeply respected him. I feared that if I was accused of killing him, that I would be resented among the people. I just simply was trying to follow God's laws.
So how were you selected to be his successor after his death?
After his death, the people respected me and thought that since I had killed Goliath, that I was a great military person. They wanted me to take over as king. I agreed. I tried to do my best, and apparently my plans worked pretty well.
Did you cut off a piece of Saul's robe? And if the answer is yes, tell us about that incident, would you please?
Saul, I was living in caves. I was trying to avoid him. Saul learned of where he thought I was, and he entered the cave. I entered the cave behind him and actually cut off a piece of his rope. When he returned into the daylight, I showed him what I had done, and I told him that if I had wanted to kill him, I would have done so. He realized that I was not a threat to his life. He realized that I truly meant my words to him, that I spoke to him. And after that, we had a strong relationship reunited.
Could you tell us about Saul's death?
Saul was killed in battle with the Philistines. His family, everybody in his family was killed along with him. His son, who was my best friend, was killed. And because of the death of his family, there was nobody of his lineage to take over as king. And that is when the people decided that I would be best.
Okay, we have a question out of our chat room. It says, do you know if a race of giants ever existed? It is said that there was a group of giants in the Americas.
There were several groups of humans that were very tall. Keep in mind that in different areas, there would be different types of foods available. And keep in mind that there was also alien interactions. There are many very, very tall aliens, and were actually cases of interbreeding where these tall aliens created individuals that were very above average in height. There was a civilization in what is now what you refer to as Antarctica, very tall individuals. The Anunnaki were aliens that were very tall. So yes, there were cultures of very tall individuals.
Thank you. What exactly was the Ark of the Covenant?
When Moses received the commandments of God, he wrote those commandments on some pieces of stone. When he led the Israelites, he put those stones in a wooden container that was constructed, and they were brought to the promised land. That container is what is referred to as the Ark of the Covenant.
Does it still exist today?
The Ark of the Covenant is not something that we are instructed to discuss.
Okay, then I will go no further questioning in that. Tell us about Bathsheba.
After I was king, a woman by the name of Bathsheba was brought to my palace. In those days, you were not supposed to have relationships with married women. Bathsheba was married. She was taking a bath, and I walked by and saw her beauty. She was married. I felt great passion towards her, and that passion resulted in a sexual encounter, and Bathsheba became pregnant through that encounter. She was an incredibly beautiful woman, and my feelings towards her were one of the greatest weaknesses of my life.
Was that relationship with her mutual consent?
In the beginning, she did not approve of the relationship, but as I was king, she relented.
Could you tell us about the death of Uriah, her husband?
This is a case where I truly went against the wishes of God. Uriah was a great military leader. I put him in a position that he was killed by the Philistines.
How did God react to your actions in your relationship with Bathsheba and the killing of Uriah?
Bathsheba was pregnant, and as a punishment, God took the child from us.
Tell us about the birth of Solomon.
I repented. I told God I knew I had done wrong. And upon my confession, he allowed Bathsheba and I to have another child, and that was Solomon.
How many wives did you have?
In those days, you would consolidate political relationships by taking wives of the different tribes. in reality, I probably had close to 20 wives.
Okay. In the New Testament, the Pharisees refer to Jesus as the son of David, implying he is the Messiah. But Jesus responds that he's the Son of Man. Can you explain why the Messiah would be referred to as the Son of David?
As time went on, I was given almost a godlike reputation by the Israelites. It was thought that as my son Solomon had been so successful in leading the Israelites for almost 40 years, that when the Messiah came, it would be of my bloodline. Jesus did not want the individuals to understand or to think that that the Messiah would be of a specific bloodline, but that Messiah was going to be what was referred to as a son of God. Jesus responded that he was not. Jesus wanted to be thought of as being a common person that walked among many. And the Philistine, or not the Philistines, but the Jewish leaders were telling that he was the King of the Jews. Jesus wanted to be thought of more as a son of man, which he was. He was the son of Mary and Joseph.
Okay. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes, I want to thank you for allowing me to come through. I hope that people understand that I had feet of clay, but that I also succeeded in leading many people to God. God is very forgiving. He forgave me for many of the things that I did that were wrong. I was judged for them, but I was forgiven. And I think that that is probably the most important message of my life. So thank you. Thank you for letting me come through tonight.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, let's take a small break and we come back with King Solomon.
Don't go away. Channeling History will return right after these brief messages.
In order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must be present. Tune in every Monday at 10 o'clock for Dark Sun Rising on the Para-X Radio Network.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stirring the Cauldron. Thursdays are a great night on the Para-X Radio Network. We start off the evening with Journey into the Light, Chapter 3, with your hosts, Psychic Little T and Tabby Cat Gash at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then, on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 8 p.m., it's Tango and Friends, hosted by Bruce Tango. And on the alternate Thursdays at 8 p.m., tune in to Stirring the Cauldron, the archive podcast. Every week at 9 p.m. Eastern, join me on Stirring the Cauldron Live. And then at 10 p.m., stick around for New Aeon Now with Lily Alley, Davron Michaels, and Christine Matza. Finally, to round out the night, join Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz on the Paranormal Encounters podcast. All this every Thursday, right here on Para-X.
Hello everyone, Barry Strohm here. For the past years, I've been using my gift of spirit communication to bring you the words of many historic and holy spirits. I recently finished my 8th book and possibly most important book, Message to God for a Modern World. The book contains 60 messages of God that I've personally channeled. It's a superb, non-denominational devotional that will bring you a new understanding of the afterlife and how to bring happiness following God's simple words. The soft cover and ebook are available on Amazon, and personalized copies are available on my website, barrystrohm.com. If you follow these messages, you will truly understand God's plan for all of us.
Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Connie, let's get on with King Solomon.
Okay, welcome, King Solomon. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to begin with the message?
Yes, thank you for allowing my father and I to be here tonight. We did a lot for our people. It was difficult times. We brought prosperity. They referred to the time of my father and myself as the golden age of the Israelites. We proved that if you followed God's commandments, that good things would happen to you. I thank you for still remembering my name. I am amazed that after all these thousands of years that people refer to the wisdom of Solomon. I tried to do what was best for the people. I think that it brought good results. And I would hope that if people today would follow the commandments of God as I tried to, and just show common sense and wisdom, that they could be equally successful. So I know you have questions for me, so I am here, and I'm pleased to try to answer them for you.
Thank you. Have you reincarnated since your life as Solomon?
I reincarnated 2 times, but on other planets as well. I serve God wherever he asked me, and when he wanted me to go to other worlds to try to serve him, I was only too happy to do it.
Okay, you are the child of David and Bathsheba. Would you describe Bathsheba for us?
My mother was actually a wonderful person. She was a lady of great beauty. She was a woman that in the beginning was not fully committed to the path of God. She made a serious mistake in being married and having a relationship with my father. But she also repented, understood what she did, and as a result, God rewarded her with other children, myself being one of them. I tried to follow her commands as I grew. She gave great wisdom to me, and she was, in spite of earlier feet of clay, she was a magnificent woman.
Would you tell us about your relationship with your father, King David?
There were times that David, my father, and I would have rocky relationships. I tried to do what I felt he wanted of me. I tried to become educated as best I could. And I tried to live a good life. It was not easy being the son of the king, but I tried to do the best that I could with him.
How old were you when you became king?
I was quite young. I was only around 15 of your years of age.
Oh, my. How were you chosen to be king?
That was mostly done through my mother. My mother held great powers. She was the favorite wife of my father. She helped him govern, and she gave him advice. When my father died, she insisted that I had the abilities to lead. She gave me advice. She did many things to help assure that I could govern satisfactorily.
Did you ever have any psychic abilities?
Yes, I would receive messages. In my dreams, I would see angels. I would see energies that I thought was God. They would give me advice. They would tell me how to handle situations. I would pray to God, and I would generally receive guidance. The guidance that I was receiving was extremely good for the people. We prospered. We built trade routes. I helped strengthen our military. We were very successful in our military securities through my reign. It was mostly through the advice of my mother, upon which I gained great information and advice.
Okay, we have another question from one of our listeners. How many brothers did you have, and how did they feel about you being chosen as king?
My father, as he told you, took many wives. So, as a process, he had many, many children. The fact that I was the firstborn with Bathsheba was probably the strongest argument that I would assume his crown. I was resented by many of my brothers, but I managed to work with many of them. There were several that had to be banished from the kingdom, but I would give many of my brothers positions of power. They could gain wealth under serving me. It was an interesting time.
Okay. Is the story of the two women and the baby true? And if it is, could you tell us the story?
Yes, that story is actually true. I had two women come before me, and they had a young child. The child was probably 2 to 3 years old. Both women claimed that they were the mothers of the baby. They were very similar, and the mothers were very similar in appearance. So I really had no way of knowing who was telling the truth. So I told them that what I would do is I would have one of my soldiers take their sword and cut the child in half, and then they would each have half of the child. The one woman immediately said, the other woman, she is the mother. You would give the baby to her. Do not kill the baby. I immediately understood that the woman was sacrificing her child so that the baby would not be killed, and that the one that was sacrificing was actually the true mother of the child. My scribes did describe the story, and I believe it did survive quite accurately through time. I always tried to be fair. I always tried to do right and to make wise decisions. I would not have killed the baby.
That was very clever on your part. Did you amass great wealth for the kingdom of Israel?
Yes, we opened trade routes. We had many tribes that would come under our protection. In return, they would bring us gold. They would pay tribute to us. This was customary of the times, and this was actually a type of taxation that you would have upon your allies. I and the kingdom accumulated incredible wealth for the time. Sadly, I did not use enough of that wealth for the people. I should have helped the poor more. I should have done more construction. I did build cities. I built waterways. I did many things. But I also did accumulate great wealth for the kingdom.
According to biblical accounts, you had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Is this accurate?
No,
I didn't think so.
that is not accurate. Although I did have many wives. At one point, I probably did have 25 or so. But as was a practice of my father, I would marry women from the different tribes to solidify political arrangements with them. That was the way we did things in those days. And a king, which I was given great powers and was given the ability to do many things. And it was not out of line or out of the teachings at the time to have all of these wives and to have harems.
Did any of your foreign wives have you worship idols?
This is a mistake that I made. As our kingdom grew, the tribes would come from many different cultures. Many of these tribes still worship different gods and deities. These women, some of which had incredible beauty, would ask if they could continue to worship the deities that were common to their countries or to their tribes. I made a great mistake and allowed these women to worship, and in certain instances, I actually joined them in their idol worship. This greatly displeased God. He was very much angered that I had wandered from the path and from the messages that he was supplying me. This was a great mistake that I made in my life.
So what happened when you angered him?
When I angered him, things would start to not go the way that we had hoped they would go. The people started to react negatively towards me. Many of the children that I had by these women would have physical problems. God does not guide you when you are drawing away from him. If you use your free will to choose evil and oppose what he wants of you, then he will allow you to follow. The most important thing to know in your lives are to use common sense and to follow the words of God. As I grew in power and wealth, I was more inclined to draw away from his wishes and his teachings. This is something that you're seeing today with many of your modern leaders. As they accumulate wealth and power, they draw away from God. Just as I was punished, those people will indeed be punished as well. The punishment may not come until you return to heaven and are judged, but there will be karma.
That is what we've been told many times. Who was the Queen of Sheba?
The Queen of Sheba was a woman of great power. She came from the area of Africa that is now known as Ethiopia. As I grew in power, she came to pay homage and bring gifts. And she also was a very beautiful woman. Although we never formally married, we did have a relationship. She was a very wonderful and powerful woman.
Did you have any children with her?
When she returned to her homeland, she did have a child, and I was the father.
Are you allowed to tell us what became of the Ark of the Covenant?
I can tell you what I did with the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay.
I built a special structure to house it and protect it. And throughout my reign as king, it was protected, and it was a source of inspiration. It was passed on to my children that took over as king.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you where it is, but does it still exist?
Portions of it still exist.
Okay. Did you write any books of the Bible?
Books of the Bible are attributed to me. Now, I was, for my times, very well educated and very well spoken. I did tell individuals that were around me of the teachings of God. I told them of the messages that I received. And I spoke to them of many things that God wanted of our people. Many of those ancient writings were passed forward, but I was never personally responsible for drafting any of the Gospels of the Old Testament. I lived long before there were any of the Gospels that were produced or written.
Okay, another one of our listeners has a question for you. What do you think of the Israeli government today, and how would you deal with Palestine?
The hatreds that exist in Israel today are beyond comprehension. They have existed for generations, and they will exist for future generations. If I was a member of the government today, I would attempt to get rid of, or to have the people understand, that the true radicals will do nothing to help their existence. I would try to educate the young Palestinians. I would do all in my power to have them understand that the future for both countries will rely on coexistence. I would try to provide jobs. I would invite the young Palestinians to come into Israel to work. I would treat them as equals, and I would do my best with the young. Sadly, I don't think that there is anything that can be done with the older Palestinians. Their hatred is too deep. But I would try to show them that through coexistence comes economic prosperity. I would do all that I can or could to isolate other countries that are spreading the hatred.
Sounds like an excellent plan. Did you construct a temple in Jerusalem?
Yes, I did construct a temple in Jerusalem. I constructed several temples. They were not as grandiose as many of the structures that were to follow. But I did create more simple temples for the worshiping of God.
Okay, if so, so you did. Why hasn't any evidence of the temple been found?
Keep in mind that the construction that I did was almost 3,000 years ago. Jerusalem has been destroyed many times. There have been wars. There have been people conquering the city. The temples were not huge as described. They were smaller structures. Even though some of the footings have been discovered, they have not been identified as structures that I constructed. They were relatively simple, and through the ages, much has taken place to destroy them.
Would you share with us any special powers that were given to you by God?
There are many things that are said of my abilities. I could not make animals dance. I did have abilities. I did have psychic abilities. I did have the abilities to communicate with animals. That is something that I know Barry can do as well. So it was not that unusual. I was very good. They would respond to me, but I was never able to make any dance. I would get messages in my dreams, as I said earlier. I would actually see forms. I would see spirits. And I would receive messages that turned out to be from God. So I did have numerous supernatural abilities.
Okay, at the time of your reign, what was the population of Jerusalem?
Jerusalem was very small. It was a small town. I don't think at times there were more than 400 or 500 people in Jerusalem at the time of my reign.
Okay, did you have the great riches that were attributed to your reign?
My riches were exaggerated, but we did truly have great riches.
So, did you have any supernatural powers other than talking to the dogs?
I was given the power to heal, and there were times that I could heal if it was God's will. But as with anybody that has the power of healing, it is only through God's energies and will that it happens.
That is correct. What is the greatest misconception in the Gospels about your life?
Well, a good start would be the number of wives and concubines. I don't think there's anybody could have that many. To me, it's quite unimaginable. But I was also attributed with many miracles. There's a lot of words attributed to me in the Old Testament of your Gospels. All of those words have been passed down from hearsay. It was probably 400 to 500 years before the first actual writings took place that exist today about my life. So almost everything that appears about me in the Bible has been exaggerated.
Yes. In life, what do you consider your greatest sin?
Drawing away from leading people to the one God. When I led myself worship back to idol worship, that was so contrary to what I was sent back for.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes. My father and I governed and led during a very, very difficult time in history. Through what we did, the Israelites prospered. They gained great wealth. They gained prosperity. They did it because we followed the wishes of God. We tried to do what is right, and we tried to show wisdom in how we governed. Today, your political people are not showing great wisdom in how they govern. They're trying to gain powers. They're trying to do many things that are hurting the people. People that govern today should follow the tenets of what we did, namely, be honest, be truthful, and try to do what is best for the people. It is a miracle that so much has been remembered of my father and myself. 3,000 years is a long time. We did what we could for the Israelites. We tried our best, and because of what we did, the Israelites prospered. When leadership changed, things became more difficult. When individuals governed that did not follow God, bad things happened. That is the same way it will be for your governments of today.
You are so correct. Thank you so much for joining us. And King David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, that was an extremely interesting session. Amazing what those two individuals really did accomplish in their time. You can submit questions and suggestions for future guests through our emails, channelinghistory on parax@gmail.com. That's channelinghistory on parax@gmail.com. My 9th book, Messages of God for a Modern World, is currently available on Amazon in softcover and Kindle. Consists of 60 channel messages of Jesus as we receive them on our Wednesday podcast, A Weekly Message from Jesus. Signed copies are only available on my website, barrystrohm.com. We thank you. We thank you for listening. Please tell your friends about our show. We are on the ParaX Network every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
And I would also like to thank you all for joining us. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.